The orange glow against the midnight sky made Penelope Hartford's blood turn to ice as she rode hard toward her ranch, the smell of burning wood and hay choking the air thick enough to taste. She had only been in Las Vegas, Nevada for an hour, selling her butter and eggs at the Mercantile, when young Tommy Chin came running down the street, screaming that her barn was ablaze. Now, as her horse thundered up the dusty path to her property, she could see the massive structure completely engulfed in flames, the heat so intense she had to stop 50 yards away. Everything she owned in this world was inside that barn. Her winter stores, her tools, the milk cow her late husband had bought her 3 years ago, the chickens that provided her income, and worst of all, the locked chest containing the $500 she had been saving for 7 years to buy the neighboring land. She dismounted and tried to run forward, but the wall of heat pushed her back like an invisible hand. "Madam, you cannot go any closer," a deep voice called out behind her, and she spun to see a tall cowboy running toward her from the direction of the road. He was covered in soot, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his blue eyes reflected the terrible orange light. "The whole thing is going to collapse any second now." "My animals!" Penelope screamed, trying again to push forward. But the stranger grabbed her around the waist and physically hauled her backward just as the barn's roof gave way with a thunderous crash, sending sparks shooting 50 feet into the desert air. She fought against him, sobbing, but he was too strong, and deep down she knew he was right. Nothing could survive that inferno. "I already got them out," he said urgently into her ear, still holding her back as she struggled. "The cow and 6 chickens. They are in your corral. I was riding past when I saw the smoke and came to help. I tried to save more, but the fire was too fast." Penelope went limp in his arms, and he loosened his grip but did not let go entirely, as if afraid she might still try to run into the flames. She turned to look at him properly, this stranger who had risked his life to save what little he could of her livelihood. His face was lean and weather-beaten, probably in his late 20s, with a strong jaw and a concerned expression that seemed genuine. His shirt was singed in several places, and she could see an angry red burn on his left forearm. "You are hurt," she whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke and tears. "It is nothing," he said, finally releasing her completely. "I am just sorry I could not do more. By the time I got here, the fire had already taken most of the structure. I do not know how it started, but it was burning fierce and fast." Penelope sank to her knees in the dirt, watching 7 years of careful work and saving turn to ash before her eyes. She was 30 years old, had been widowed at 27 when her husband died of pneumonia during a harsh winter, and had been scraping by ever since on this small ranch 10 miles outside Las Vegas. The barn had held everything: her seed for spring planting, her preserves and dried goods for winter, her tools, her tack, and that chest of money. $500. It might as well have been 5,000 for all the hope she had of saving that much again. The stranger knelt beside her, a respectful distance away, and said nothing. He simply stayed there as the barn burned itself out over the next 2 hours, occasionally adding water from her well to the edges to keep the fire from spreading to the house or the small stable where she kept her riding horse. Other neighbors arrived as the flames became visible from miles away, but there was nothing anyone could do except watch and make sure it did not spread across the dry Nevada rangeland. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene in their beauty, given the destruction before her, Penelope finally stood on shaking legs. The barn was nothing but a smoking ruin of blackened timbers and ash. The stranger was still there, standing a few feet away, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I am Harrison Cole," he said quietly. "I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here. I was heading back from a cattle drive to California when I saw your smoke." "Penelope Hartford," she replied automatically, unable to take her eyes off the ruins. "Thank you for saving my animals. You did not have to risk yourself for a stranger." "Yes, I did," Harrison said simply. "What kind of man would I be if I rode past?" She finally turned to look at him fully in the growing light. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who made his living through hard physical work. His clothes were dusty from travel, and his horse, a fine-looking buckskin gelding, was tied near her corral, drinking from the trough. Everything about him suggested capability and quiet strength. "I have nothing left," Penelope heard herself say, the words feeling distant and strange. Everything was in that barn. Harrison's jaw tightened. "Do you have family? Somewhere you can go?" She shook her head. "My parents died of cholera in '58. My husband's family is back in Ohio, but we left because they did not approve of our marriage. I have no one." The year was 1873, and Nevada was still raw and wild, with Las Vegas being little more than a dusty railroad stop and a handful of ranches scattered across the valley. A woman alone had few options, and everyone in the territory knew it. Penelope could see Harrison thinking through the same calculations she was, his brow furrowed. "You cannot stay here alone with no supplies and winter coming," he said finally. "It is August now, which gives you maybe 10 weeks before the first snows hit the high country." "I know," Penelope said, her voice flat. She did know. She also knew she had approximately $20 in a jar in her kitchen, one milk cow, 6 traumatized chickens, her riding horse, and a house with nothing in the cupboards. She had been planning to do her monthly shopping after selling her eggs and butter in town. "I will figure something out." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, and she lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how terrified she truly was. She had been alone before. She had survived her husband's death and 3 hard years since. She would survive this too, somehow. "I am a carpenter," Harrison said abruptly. "Before I came west, I worked in my father's building business in Missouri. I can help you rebuild the barn." Penelope stared at him. "I cannot pay you. Everything I had saved burned in there." "I am not asking for payment," Harrison replied, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I am offering to help a neighbor in need. The lumber will be the issue, but I have some credit at the mill in town, and I just got paid for my cattle. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back when you are on your feet again." She wanted to refuse. Pride demanded she refuse, but survival was more important than pride, and the simple truth was that she needed help. Without that barn, she had no way to store winter feed for her animals, no way to preserve food, no way to survive the coming cold months. She would lose the ranch, lose everything her husband had worked for, everything she had fought to maintain. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Penelope asked, searching his face for some hidden motive, some expectation that would come with strings attached. Harrison was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the smoking ruins. "3 years ago, I lost my wife and infant son to diphtheria. For months after, I could barely function. My neighbors, people I had only known a short while, kept my ranch running, brought me food, made sure my cattle did not starve. They saved me when I could not save myself. I have been looking for a way to pay that kindness forward ever since." The raw honesty in his voice hit Penelope like a physical blow. She saw the grief in the tight lines around his eyes, the way his hands clenched briefly before relaxing. This was a man who understood loss, who knew what it meant to have your entire world collapse around you. "All right," she said quietly. "I accept your help, Mr. Cole, and I will pay you back every cent. I promise you that." "Harrison," he corrected gently, "and I believe you, Penelope. Now let me help you check on those animals, and then you should rest. You have been up all night." They walked together to the corral, where her milk cow, a gentle brown Jersey named Clementine, stood looking confused and frightened. The 6 chickens that Harrison had managed to save were huddled in the corner, feathers singed but alive. Penelope felt tears threatening again at the sight of them. It was not much, but it was something. "I need to ride into town and send some telegrams, order lumber, and gather supplies," Harrison said, checking the sun's position. "Will you be all right here for a few hours?" Penelope nodded, too exhausted to argue. "I will be fine. I need to take inventory of what I have left in the house and see what can be salvaged from the barn once it cools down enough. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue, probably to tell her to rest instead, but he seemed to understand that she needed to do something, needed to feel like she had some control over the situation. I will be back before dark, he said. Do not go into those ruins alone. If the ash collapses, you could be badly burned or worse. After he rode away, Penelope stood in her yard for a long time, staring at the destruction. Then she forced herself to move, to go into her small house and see what she had to work with. The house was a simple two-room structure, just a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and a bedroom. Her husband had built it with his own hands 7 years ago when they first claimed this land. It was not much, but it was solid and well made, and it was hers. In her cupboards, she found half a sack of flour, some salt, a little sugar, and a few potatoes. In her root cellar, which was separate from the barn, she had more potatoes, some onions, and a few jars of preserves that had been too precious to store in the barn. It was enough for maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. After that, she would have to rely on the cow's milk, eggs if the chickens recovered from their trauma enough to lay, and whatever she could trade for in town. The exhaustion hit her then like a physical wave, and she sank into the chair at her small table, letting her head fall into her hands. She was so tired, not just from the sleepless night, but from years of fighting to survive alone, of never quite having enough, of always being one disaster away from losing everything. And now that disaster had come. But she could not give up. Giving up would mean losing the ranch, losing the last piece of her husband Robert that remained. He had loved this place, had dreamed of building it into something substantial. She owed it to his memory to keep fighting. Penelope forced herself to stand, to wash her face in the basin, to change her smoke-stained dress for a clean one. Then she went back outside to begin the grim task of trying to salvage anything from the ruins that might have survived. She stayed well back from the still smoking timbers, using a long stick to poke at the edges, but everything was ash and melted metal. The chest that had held her money was somewhere in that wreckage, probably melted into an unrecognizable lump. 7 years of savings gone. Harrison returned just as the sun was setting, his horse loaded with supplies. He had brought flour, cornmeal, beans, bacon, coffee, and other staples, enough to fill her empty cupboards and then some. Penelope tried to protest the expense, but he waved her off. "This is not charity," he said firmly as he helped her carry the goods inside. "This is practical. You cannot help rebuild if you are starving, and I cannot work alone. Consider yourself hired as my assistant carpenter." Despite everything, Penelope felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I have never built anything in my life." "Then you are about to learn," Harrison replied, and there was a glint of humor in his tired eyes that made him suddenly look younger and far more approachable. "I ordered the lumber from the mill. It will be delivered in 3 days. That gives us time to clear the site, lay a proper foundation, and plan the structure. This barn is going to be better than the last one, Penelope. Stronger, safer, with proper ventilation and a stone base to prevent exactly this kind of disaster." "You do not have to do all this," Penelope said, feeling overwhelmed by his generosity. "A simple structure would be enough." Harrison set down the last sack of flour and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I do not do things halfway. If I am going to build a barn, it is going to be a barn that will last 50 years. Your husband would want that, would he not?" The mention of Robert made her throat tighten, but she nodded. "He would. Robert always said if something was worth doing, it was worth doing right." "He sounds like he was a good man," Harrison said quietly. "He was," Penelope agreed. "He was not very practical sometimes, and he had more dreams than sense, but he had a good heart. He died trying to save a neighbor's cattle during a blizzard, caught pneumonia, and was gone within a week." Harrison's expression softened with understanding. "I am sorry. That is a hard way to lose someone." They stood there in the gathering darkness, two people bound by grief and loss, and Penelope felt something shift inside her. For the first time in 3 years, she did not feel quite so alone. Over the next 3 days, Harrison proved to be a man of his word. He arrived at dawn each morning and worked until dusk, clearing away the burned timbers, digging out a proper foundation trench, and teaching Penelope the basics of construction as they went. She learned how to use a level, how to measure and cut, how to read his careful plans that he sketched out in a worn leather notebook. They worked in a companionable silence most of the time, but gradually they began to talk. Harrison told her about his ranch, a modest operation with about 200 head of cattle and a small cabin that he had built himself after his wife died, unable to stay in the house they had shared. Penelope talked about her struggles to keep the ranch running alone, about the small victories like a good egg season or getting a fair price for her butter in town. "Why did you stay?" Harrison asked on the third day as they took a break in the shade of her house, drinking cool water from the well. "After your husband died, I mean. Most women would have sold out and gone back east." Penelope looked out across the land, at the desert mountains in the distance and the scrub brush that dotted the valley. "Because this is mine," she said simply. "Mine and Robert's. We built this from nothing, and I will not let it go without a fight. Back east, I would be at the mercy of Robert's family or my husband's relatives, expected to remarry whoever they chose or live as a dependent charity case. Here I am my own person. I may be poor and struggling, but I am free." Harrison nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Freedom is worth fighting for. When the lumber arrived on the fourth day, they began the real work of building. Harrison had designed a barn that was 30 feet wide and 40 feet long, with a stone foundation to prevent fire from spreading from the ground, and a loft for hay storage that had escape hatches in case of emergency. He worked with a focus and skill that spoke of years of experience, his hands sure and capable as he guided Penelope through each step. She discovered that she liked the work. There was something satisfying about seeing the structure take shape board by board, about learning a new skill that made her feel capable and strong. Her hands developed blisters that hardened into calluses. Her muscles ached every night, but she also felt more alive than she had in years. Harrison was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid when she made mistakes, always willing to explain something a second or third time. He also insisted on regular breaks, making sure they both ate properly and stayed hydrated in the brutal August heat. Penelope found herself looking forward to those breaks, to the conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. "What made you come west?" she asked him one afternoon as they sat in the shade, eating the sandwiches she had prepared from the supplies he had brought. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "After Mary and the baby died, I could not stay in Missouri. Everything reminded me of them. I needed to go somewhere where I could start fresh, where no one knew me as the man who lost his family. So I sold my share of my father's business to my brother and headed west. Ended up in Nevada because the land was cheap and I liked the openness of it." "Do you regret it?" Penelope asked softly. "No," Harrison said, his voice firm. "Coming here saved my life in a way, gave me something to focus on besides my grief. What about you? Do you regret staying?" Penelope thought about it honestly. "Sometimes, on the worst days, when everything goes wrong and I am so tired I can barely stand, I wonder if I am just being stubborn. But then I watch the sunrise over the mountains, or I see something growing that I planted with my own hands, and I know this is where I am supposed to be." Harrison looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are stronger than you know, Penelope Hartford." The compliment, simple and sincere, made warmth spread through her chest in a way that had nothing to do with the desert heat. She found herself noticing things about Harrison that had nothing to do with his carpentry skills, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, rare though those smiles were. The gentle way he handled the animals when he helped her with evening chores, the sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him, a deep, rich sound that made her want to hear it again. 2 weeks into the construction, they had the frame and walls completed. The barn was taking beautiful shape, even better than Penelope had imagined. Harrison had included features she never would have thought of, like a separate feed room with a tight-fitting door to keep out mice, and windows positioned to provide cross-ventilation in summer while still protecting from winter storms. "This is too much," Penelope said, for what felt like the 100th time as Harrison installed the window frames he had built. "I will never be able to repay you for all this." Harrison paused in his work and turned to look at her, his expression patient. "Penelope, I told you, this is not about repayment. This is about doing what is right. Besides," he added with a small smile, "you have been working beside me every day. This barn is as much your work as mine." "I am just following your instructions," she protested. "You are doing a lot more than that," Harrison said firmly. "You have learned fast, worked hard, and never complained, even when I know you must be exhausted. Give yourself some credit." That night, after Harrison had ridden home, Penelope sat on her porch and realized with a start that she had smiled more in the past 2 weeks than she had in the entire 3 years since Robert died. Working with Harrison, learning from him, talking with him, it had awakened something in her that she thought had died with her husband. Not that she was trying to replace Robert. No one could replace him. But she was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, her life did not have to be only about survival and grief. The thought scared her almost as much as it intrigued her. The next morning, Harrison arrived with someone else, a young man who introduced himself as his neighbor's son, eager to learn carpentry. With the extra help, the work went faster, and within another week they had the roof on and were working on the interior stalls and storage areas. The barn was magnificent, better than anything Penelope could have hoped for. But as the barn neared completion, she realized with a sinking feeling that once it was done, Harrison would have no reason to come by every day. He would go back to his own ranch and his own life, and she would be alone again. The prospect felt unbearably lonely in a way that surprised her with its intensity. She was also acutely aware that she still had no way to repay him for the lumber and supplies. Her chickens had started laying again, but 6 chickens did not produce enough eggs to make a dent in what she owed. Her cow gave milk, which she had been making into butter and cheese to sell, but that was slow money, pennies and nickels when she owed dollars. "I have been thinking," Harrison said one evening, as they finished up for the day, the young helper having already left for home. "You need more income to rebuild your savings. Have you thought about expanding your operation?" Penelope gave him a wry look. "With what money? Or did you forget that everything I had burned up?" "I did not forget," Harrison said calmly. "But hear me out. You have good grazing land here, more than one cow and a few chickens need. What if we partnered up? I have too many cattle for my land, was planning to sell some off anyway. What if instead I moved some of my herd here? We split the work and the profits." Penelope stared at him. "That is not a partnership. That is charity." "It is business," Harrison corrected. "You have land and time. I have cattle and no time because I am running myself ragged, trying to manage everything alone. We both benefit. You get income to rebuild your savings. I get quality grazing land and help managing the herd. It makes sense." "Harrison," Penelope said slowly, "why are you really doing all this? And do not tell me it is just paying forward a kindness. You have gone far beyond that." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, and in that light he looked both vulnerable and determined. "Because I care about what happens to you," he said finally. "These past few weeks, working with you, getting to know you, it has reminded me that there is more to life than just going through the motions. You are strong and brave, and you deserve a chance to build something real here. If I can help with that, I want to." Penelope's heart was beating too fast, and she could feel heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. I care about what happens to you too, she admitted quietly. More than I probably should, considering we have only known each other a few weeks. Harrison took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. Is that a problem for you? I do not know, Penelope said honestly. I loved my husband. I still love his memory. But I am also starting to realize that maybe I do not want to spend the rest of my life alone. Does that make me disloyal? No, Harrison said gently. It makes you human. I loved my wife too, and I always will. But she would not want me to stop living, just like I suspect your husband would not want that for you. They stood there in the fading light, the new barn rising behind them, and Penelope felt the last of her resistance crumbling. All right, she said. Let us try this partnership, but I want it in writing, with fair terms for both of us. I will not be beholden to charity, even well-meaning charity. Harrison's face broke into a genuine smile, the first truly open, happy expression she had seen from him. Deal. I will draw up a proper contract. We can have it witnessed in town. Over the next few days, they worked out the details. Harrison would move 50 head of cattle to Penelope's land. She would be responsible for their daily care and management. He would handle sales and provide veterinary care when needed. Profits would be split 60-40 in her favor to account for the land use and her daily labor. It was a fair arrangement, more than fair really, but Harrison insisted. You are taking on the daily work, he pointed out when she tried to argue for a 50-50 split. That is worth the extra 10%. They signed the contract in Las Vegas at the land office, with the clerk as witness. Afterward, Harrison suggested they have dinner at the hotel restaurant to celebrate, and Penelope agreed, ignoring the curious looks from the other diners. Let people talk. She was entering a business partnership with a neighbor, nothing more. Except even as she thought it, she knew it was not quite true. What she felt when she looked at Harrison sitting across from her, his eyes warm in the lamplight as he told her a funny story about a stubborn bull, was definitely not just business. The barn was finished in early September, and Harrison threw a barn-raising celebration, inviting all the nearby neighbors. It was traditional to do so, a way of thanking everyone who had helped, though in truth, Harrison had done most of the work himself with Penelope's assistance. Still, people came, bringing food and congratulations, and Penelope felt overwhelmed by the kindness of her community. She had been so isolated in her grief and struggle that she had forgotten how good people could be. Mrs. Chen, whose son Tommy had alerted her to the fire, brought a beautiful apple pie. The Johnsons brought fresh bread and jam. Even old Mr. Martinez, who rarely left his ranch, came and pressed a silver dollar into Penelope's hand, telling her it was for luck in the new barn. By the end of the evening, she had tears in her eyes from the generosity. Harrison stayed after everyone else had left, helping her clean up the mess of a party well enjoyed. They worked in comfortable silence, and when the last dish was washed and put away, they walked out to admire the barn in the moonlight. It is beautiful, Penelope said softly. Better than I ever imagined. Thank you, Harrison, for everything. You are welcome, he replied. But remember, you helped build this too. You should be proud of what you have accomplished. I am, she admitted, but I could not have done it without you. Harrison turned to face her, and in the moonlight his expression was tender. Penelope, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, they have meant more to me than I know how to say. I did not come here looking for anything except to help a neighbor, but somewhere along the way, you became more than that to me. I understand if you are not ready, if you still need time to grieve your husband, but I wanted you to know that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would like to court you properly. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Part of her wanted to say it was too soon, that she needed more time. But another part, the part that had been slowly coming back to life over the past weeks, knew that this was right. Harrison was not trying to replace Robert any more than she could replace his Mary. They were two people who had both loved and lost, finding their way towards something new together. I think I would like that, she said quietly. I am still figuring out what it means to move forward while honoring the past, but I know that I look forward to seeing you every day. I know that you make me laugh and feel capable and strong. I know that when I think about the future now, I can actually imagine being happy again. Harrison reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused from work, and the simple touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. Then let us take this slow and see where it leads, he said. No pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other. I would like that very much, Penelope agreed, squeezing his hand gently. They stood there holding hands in the moonlight, the new barn standing as a symbol of resilience and new beginnings, and Penelope felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in years. Over the following weeks, Harrison was true to his word. He courted her properly with Sunday picnics and evening walks with small gifts like wildflowers picked on his ride over or a book he thought she might enjoy. He also moved his 50 cattle to her land as promised, and Penelope threw herself into learning how to manage the herd. It was hard work, demanding and sometimes frustrating, but she loved it. She loved being outside, working with the animals, seeing the tangible results of her efforts. The cattle fattened on her good grazing land, and by October, they were able to sell 10 head at a profit that made Penelope gasp when Harrison showed her the numbers. Her share was more than she had made in the entire previous year. For the first time since the fire, she could breathe a little easier, could imagine actually rebuilding her savings. This is just the start, Harrison told her as they deposited her money in the Las Vegas bank. By next year, with calves and better management, you will be doing even better. We will be doing better, Penelope corrected. This is a partnership, remember? Harrison smiled at that, and Penelope noticed that he smiled much more often now. The grief was still there in his eyes. She suspected it always would be, just as her own grief for Robert remained. But it was no longer the only thing she saw when she looked at him. Now she saw warmth and humor and a quiet strength that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before Robert died. They spent Thanksgiving together, just the two of them, cooking a simple meal at Penelope's house. It felt natural and right to share the day with him, to sit across her small table and talk about everything and nothing. After dinner, as they sat on her porch watching the stars come out, Harrison took her hand again. I know we said we would take this slow, he said quietly, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is not some passing fancy. I am falling in love with you, Penelope. Have been for weeks now, if I am honest. Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. She had known, of course. It was there in every gesture, every look, every thoughtful thing he did. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. I am falling in love with you too, she admitted. It scares me sometimes how much I feel, but it also makes me happier than I have been in so long. Harrison raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Then that is enough for now. We have time to figure out the rest. December brought the first real cold snap, and with it came a crisis. One of Penelope's cattle, a young heifer, got tangled in some old wire fencing on the far edge of the property and injured her leg badly. Harrison rode over as soon as Penelope sent word, and together they spent hours treating the wound and making sure infection did not set in. The heifer survived, but it was a close call, and it reminded Penelope how precarious their situation still was. One disaster, one stroke of bad luck, and everything could fall apart again. The fear kept her up at night, staring at the ceiling and worrying. Harrison seemed to sense her anxiety, and one evening in late December he brought it up directly. They were in her kitchen, having shared a simple dinner, and the wind was howling outside, rattling the windows. Talk to me, Harrison said. You have been quiet for days, and I know something is bothering you. Penelope sighed and set down her coffee cup. I am afraid, she admitted. The fire taught me how quickly everything can be taken away. We have built up the herd, the barn is finished, but what if something happens again? What if there is another fire, or a harsh winter, or cattle thieves? I cannot go through losing everything again, Harrison. I do not think I am strong enough. Harrison reached across the table and took both her hands in his. You are strong enough for anything, but you also do not have to face things alone anymore. Penelope, I have been thinking about this for a while now, and I want to ask you something. I know we have only been courting a few months, but I am 31 years old, and I know my own heart. I want to marry you. I want to combine our ranches, pool our resources, build something lasting together. I am not saying we have to get married tomorrow, but I am asking you to think about it, to consider a future where we face whatever comes together. Penelope felt tears pricking her eyes. Are you sure? We are both still carrying grief from our first marriages. What if we are just seeking comfort rather than real love? I have thought about that, Harrison said seriously. I have questioned my feelings, examined them from every angle, and I am certain that what I feel for you is real, deep, and lasting. Yes, we have both loved before, and yes, we have both lost. But that does not make what we have now any less genuine. If anything, it makes me more certain. I know how precious and fragile life is, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not love you. I love you too, Penelope whispered. I do, truly. It is different from what I felt for Robert, but it is just as real. Then marry me, Harrison said simply. Not because you need rescuing or because it is practical, though it is certainly both of those things. Marry me because we make each other happy, because we work well together, because life is better when we face it as a team. Penelope looked at this good, kind man who had appeared in her darkest hour like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. He had helped her rebuild not just her barn, but her entire life, and he had done it with patience and respect and genuine care. The thought of binding her life to his filled her not with fear, but with a deep sense of rightness. Yes, she said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I will marry you, Harrison Cole. His face lit up with a joy so pure and complete that it took her breath away. He stood and pulled her up from her chair, wrapping her in a tight embrace that felt like coming home. When he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Penelope felt the last walls around her heart crumble completely. She was not betraying Robert's memory by loving again. She was honoring his wish for her to have a full and happy life. They were married in Las Vegas in early January of 1874 in a simple ceremony at the church with a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Penelope wore a new dress in deep blue that Harrison had insisted on buying for her, and he wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous in equal measure. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Penelope felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not felt in years. After the wedding, they had to make practical decisions about combining their lives. Harrison's ranch was larger and had a more substantial house, but Penelope was reluctant to leave the land Robert had claimed. In the end, they decided to keep both properties, using Harrison's place as their main home and Penelope's ranch for the cattle operation, since her land had better grazing and water access. It was strange at first, living in Harrison's house, sleeping in his bed, navigating the intimacy of marriage with someone new. But Harrison was patient and gentle, and Penelope found herself adjusting more quickly than she had expected. They fell into easy routines, working together during the day and spending the evenings talking, reading, or simply enjoying each other's company. The first real test of their marriage came in late February, when a late winter storm hit the valley hard. The snow piled up 3 feet deep, and temperatures dropped so low that the cattle were in danger of freezing. Harrison and Penelope worked around the clock, breaking ice on water troughs, distributing extra feed, and making sure none of the animals were trapped in drifts. It was exhausting, brutal work, but they did it together, supporting each other when one was ready to drop, taking turns catching brief naps so someone was always watching the herd. When the storm finally broke after 4 days, they had lost only 2 cattle, an amazingly low number given the severity of the weather. We make a good team, Harrison said as they finally collapsed into bed, too exhausted to even eat. The best team, Penelope agreed, curling into his warmth. I do not know how I ever managed alone. You managed because you are strong and stubborn, Harrison murmured, already half asleep, but I am glad you do not have to anymore. Spring came early that year, and with it came new life. The cattle started calving in March, and Penelope discovered that she loved helping with the births, loved the miracle of new life entering the world. She and Harrison spent long hours in the pastures, making sure the mothers and babies were healthy, dealing with the occasional difficult birth or sickly calf. It was during one of these long nights in the barn, waiting for a difficult calving, that Harrison brought up the subject that had been quietly hovering between them for weeks. Have you thought about children? He asked carefully, his focus on the laboring cow, but his tension suggesting this was not a casual question. I mean, children of our own? Penelope was quiet for a moment, considering. She was 31 years old, not too old certainly, but not young either. She and Robert had never been blessed with children, though they had wanted them. She had assumed that perhaps she simply could not conceive, but the question was really whether she wanted to try. I have thought about it, she admitted. I always wanted children with Robert, but it never happened. I do not know if I can have children, to be honest, but I think I would like to try if you want to. Harrison looked at her then, his expression tender. I would love to have children with you, but if it does not happen, I will not love you any less. We already have a good life together. We do, Penelope agreed. But yes, let us see what the future brings. The future brought more than she had dared to hope for. By late May, Penelope was fairly certain she was pregnant, though she waited another few weeks before telling Harrison, wanting to be absolutely sure. When she finally told him one evening in June, sitting on the porch of their home and watching the sun set over the mountains, he was so happy he actually shouted with joy, then immediately apologized for startling her. I'm not that fragile, Penelope laughed, delighted by his reaction. But yes, I am fairly certain. I will go see the doctor in town next week to confirm, but all the signs are there. Harrison pulled her into a careful embrace, as if afraid she might break. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. I cannot believe it. Neither can I, Penelope admitted. After so many years of thinking it might not happen, it feels like a miracle. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was sick most mornings for the first few months, and the Nevada heat in July and August made her miserable. But Harrison was attentive and patient, taking over more of the ranch work so she could rest, making sure she ate even when she did not feel like it, and generally treating her like she was made of spun glass. I am pregnant, not dying, Penelope protested one afternoon when he insisted she sit down instead of helping with the fence repair. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Not my woman, Harrison said firmly. You are carrying our child, and I am going to make sure you and the baby are as healthy as possible. So sit down, drink your water, and let me do the heavy lifting. Penelope rolled her eyes but did as he asked, secretly touched by his concern. As the months passed and her belly swelled, she found herself falling even more deeply in love with her husband. He was excited about the baby in a way that was both endearing and slightly terrifying. He built a cradle by hand, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He read every book he could find about infant care. He talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and making ridiculous promises about teaching the baby to ride and rope and build. You do not even know if it will be interested in ranching, Penelope pointed out one evening as Harrison explained to her belly about the proper way to throw a lasso. Then I will teach them whatever they are interested in, Harrison replied without missing a beat. The point is that this child is going to know they are loved and supported no matter what. It was that attitude, that unconditional love and support, that made Penelope certain they were going to be good parents together. Whatever happened, Their child would grow up knowing they were wanted and cherished. The baby came on a cold February morning in 1875, almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope was certain she could not do it, could not push anymore, could not bear another contraction. But Harrison was there the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her how strong she was and how proud he was of her. When their son finally entered the world with a healthy, angry cry, Penelope wept with relief and joy. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes, already squinting at the bright world he had entered. "He is beautiful," Harrison whispered, tears streaming down his face, as the doctor placed the baby in Penelope's arms. "You are both so beautiful." They named him Robert Harrison Cole, honoring both of the men who had shaped their lives. Little Robbie, as they called him, was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a set of lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. Penelope had never known exhaustion like those first few months of motherhood, but she also had never known such overwhelming love. Every smile, every tiny sound, every milestone felt like a miracle. Harrison was a devoted father, walking the floor with Robbie when he cried at night, changing nappies without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son with an expression of wonder. Watching him with the baby, Penelope sometimes thought about the child he had lost, the son who had never gotten to grow up. She knew he was thinking about that lost baby too, but she also saw that Robbie was bringing healing in a way nothing else could have. As Robbie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered, the cattle operation expanded, and they were able to hire 2 ranch hands to help with the work, taking some of the burden off Harrison and giving Penelope more time with their son. They built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Money was still tight sometimes, and there were still crises to manage, bad weather and sick animals, and all the 100 challenges that came with ranching in Nevada. But they faced everything together, and the ranch that had risen from the ashes of that terrible fire was now thriving. On a warm evening in May of 1876, Penelope stood on the porch of their home, watching Harrison teach 2-year-old Robbie how to pat the horse's nose gently. The barn that Harrison had built stood solid and strong in the distance, filled now with hay and supplies and all the things they needed to keep the ranch running. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, fat and healthy. In the house behind her, another baby grew in her belly, due in the fall. She thought about that terrible night 3 years ago when her world had gone up in flames, when she had stood watching everything she owned turn to ash and thought she would never recover. She had been wrong. She had not just recovered. She had built something better than she ever could have imagined, and she had done it with the help of a good man who had appeared in her darkest hour. Harrison looked up and caught her watching him, and the smile he gave her was full of love and contentment. He said something to Robbie, who waved enthusiastically at his mother, then walked over to join her on the porch, their son toddling behind him. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, sliding an arm around her waist and pulling her close. "About fires and ashes and new beginnings," Penelope said. "About how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in ways we never expect. Are you glad I happened to ride by that night?" Harrison asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "Every single day," Penelope replied, turning to kiss him softly. "Every single day." Robbie tugged on Harrison's pant leg, demanding attention, and they both laughed. Harrison scooped up their son, and the 3 of them stood together watching the sun set over the Nevada mountains, a family built from loss and grief and the courage to try again. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges, Penelope knew. There always were. But she also knew that whatever came, they would face it together. The barn that had burned had been just wood and nails and stored goods. What they had built in its place was so much more. It was a life, a family, a love that had risen from ashes to become something strong and true and lasting. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Penelope rested her head on Harrison's shoulder and felt a deep sense of peace. She had lost much in her life, but she had also gained more than she could have imagined. And every day when she looked at the barn that Harrison had helped her build, she was reminded that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we have to rebuild from nothing, when we have to find the courage to start over and trust that something better is waiting on the other side of disaster. The baby in her belly kicked, and Robbie was chattering about the horse, and Harrison was warm and solid beside her, and Penelope Hartford Cole knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The fire had taken her past, but it had also cleared the ground for a future richer than anything she could have planned for herself. In the ashes of loss, she had found love. In the work of rebuilding, she had found purpose. And in the arms of a cowboy who had stopped to help a stranger, she had found home. Years rolled on with the steady rhythm of ranch life. By 1878, they had 3 children. Robbie, now 5 years old and full of energy. Little Mary, at 2 years, with her mother's auburn hair and stubborn streak. And baby Thomas, just 6 months old and already showing signs of his father's calm temperament. The house had been expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch had grown too, now running over 200 head of cattle across both properties. Penelope sometimes had to stop and marvel at how much her life had changed. She had gone from a widow scraping by alone to a wife and mother with a thriving ranch and a family that filled every corner of her heart. It had not always been easy. There had been lean years and losses, sick children, and dangerous weather, all the trials that came with life on the frontier. But through it all, Harrison had been her steady partner, her rock, her love. She watched him now as he worked with Robbie in the corral, teaching their son to rope a fence post. Harrison was 35 now, with a few threads of silver starting to show in his dark hair, but he was still strong and capable, still the man who had ridden into her life on the worst night she had ever known and stayed to help her rebuild. "Mama, watch me," Robbie called, and Penelope obliged, applauding when he managed to get his loop around the post on the third try. "Well done, sweetheart," she called back, then smiled as Mary tugged on her skirt, demanding to be picked up. She lifted her daughter onto her hip, adjusting Thomas in her other arm, and walked over to join her husband and son. "He is getting good," Harrison said proudly as Robbie tried again. "Has your eye-hand coordination." "And your patience," Penelope replied, "which is a blessing because he certainly did not get it from me." Harrison laughed and leaned over to kiss her temple, a casual gesture of affection that still made her heart flutter even after 4 years of marriage. "Your impatience has its uses. It is what drives you to get things done." "Is that a polite way of calling me bossy?" Penelope teased. "I would never dare," Harrison said with mock solemnity, his eyes twinkling with humor. That evening, after the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch in the cooling night air, Penelope brought up something that had been on her mind for weeks. "I have been thinking about something," she said carefully. "Do you remember the Chen family? Tommy was the boy who alerted me to the fire." "Of course," Harrison said. "Good people. Why?" "Mrs. Chen mentioned last time I was in town that they are struggling. Their well went dry and they do not have the money to dig a new one. I thought maybe we could help." "Not charity," she added quickly, seeing Harrison about to speak. "But maybe Tommy could work for us a few days a week, and we could pay him enough that they can afford the well. He is 14 now, old enough to be useful around the ranch." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I think that is a fine idea. Tommy is a good kid, and you are right. They helped us when we needed it. It is only right to return the favor." "We have been so blessed," Penelope said softly. "Sometimes I feel like we should do more for our neighbors, for people who are struggling the way I was." "Then we will," Harrison said simply. "We are in a position to help now, and I think we should. What did you have in mind?" They talked long into the night, making plans. By the end of the conversation, they had decided to hire Tommy Chen and also offer low-interest loans to neighboring ranchers who were struggling, secured against future cattle sales. It was not charity, it was good business and good neighboring combined. Over the next few years, they helped several families avoid losing their ranches, and in the process built a network of allies and friends who would support each other through hard times. In 1880, when Robbie was 7 and starting to read and write with the help of the traveling teacher who came through Las Vegas twice a month, disaster struck again. A virulent strain of influenza swept through the territory, hitting children especially hard. When Mary came down with a high fever and terrible cough, Penelope felt her old fears roar back to life. She could not lose her daughter. She could not survive that. But Harrison was there, calm and steady, helping her care for Mary around the clock, sponge bathing her to bring down the fever, keeping her hydrated, sitting up through the long nights when the cough was so bad the little girl could barely breathe, and slowly, painfully slowly, Mary began to recover. It took 3 weeks before she was fully well again, and Penelope had never been so grateful for anything in her entire life. "We almost lost her," she whispered to Harrison one night after Mary was finally on the mend. "When I thought about losing her, I felt like I did that night watching the barn burn, like everything was being taken away again." "But we did not lose her," Harrison said firmly, holding Penelope close. "She is going to be fine. And even if the worst had happened, even if we had lost her, we would have survived it together. That is what we do, Penelope. We face things together, and we survive, and we keep going." His words were a comfort and a reminder. She was not alone anymore. Whatever came, whatever trials life threw at them, they would face it as a team. That knowledge gave her a strength she had never had when she was alone. By 1882, Robbie was 9 and already showing signs of being a natural rancher with an eye for cattle and a way with horses that reminded Penelope of his father. Mary was 4 and as wild and free as the Nevada wind, constantly getting into mischief and making them both laugh with her antics. Thomas was 2 and a quiet, thoughtful child who seemed content to watch the world and think his own thoughts. They were also expecting another baby, due in the winter. "4 children," Harrison said one evening, shaking his head in wonder. "When I was 30 and newly widowed, I never imagined this would be my life." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though she knew the answer from the contentment in his eyes. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Harrison replied. "You gave me a reason to live again, Penelope. You and these children, this ranch, this life we have built together. It is more than I ever dreamed of." "You gave me the same thing," Penelope said. "That night the barn burned. I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But really, I was being given a chance to build something better. I just did not know it yet." Their 4th child, a daughter they named Helen, was born in January of 1883 during a cold snap that had ice forming on the inside of the windows. She was tiny and perfect, with Harrison's dark hair and Penelope's green eyes, and she completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right. As the years continued to pass, the children grew and the ranch prospered. Robbie, at 15, was already doing the work of a full ranch hand and making noises about wanting to buy his own land someday and start his own operation. Mary, now 10, had discovered a talent for training horses and spent every spare moment in the corral working with the young stock. Thomas, at 8, was fascinated by numbers and kept meticulous records of the ranch's income and expenses, already showing the mind of a businessman. And little Helen, at 5, was following in Mary's footsteps, fearless and full of life. On a late summer evening in 1888, 15 years after the fire that had brought them together, Harrison and Penelope stood together looking out at their land. The barn that he had built still stood solid and strong, though they had added on to it twice to accommodate the expanding operation. The house had grown from 2 rooms to 8, filled with the noise and chaos of a large, happy family. The cattle numbered over 400 now, grazing on land that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Do you ever think about that night?" Penelope asked quietly. The night of the fire? All the time, Harrison admitted. I think about how close I came to not riding this way, to taking a different route home. I think about what my life would be like now if I had made a different choice. And I am grateful every single day that I saw that smoke and decided to investigate. I am grateful too, Penelope said. I am grateful that you stopped to help, that you stayed, that you saw something in me worth building a life with. You saved more than my livestock that night, Harrison. You saved me. We saved each other, Harrison corrected gently. I was just going through the motions before I met you, Penelope. You gave me a reason to truly live again. You and our children. You are my whole world. Penelope turned to face him, this man who had stood by her through everything, who had helped her rebuild from the ashes and create a life more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. His face showed the years now, lines around his eyes and mouth, more silver in his hair. But to her, he was still the handsome cowboy who had appeared in her darkest hour and refused to leave. I love you, she said simply, more than I can ever put into words. I love you too, Harrison replied, pulling her into a kiss that still made her heart race after all these years. Always have, always will. From the house behind them came the sound of the children arguing about something, probably who was supposed to set the table for dinner, and they both smiled. This was their life now, noisy and chaotic and full of love. It was everything Penelope had never dared to hope for after Robert died, everything Harrison had thought lost forever when Mary and their baby son passed away. As they walked back toward the house hand in hand, Penelope thought about the long journey that had brought them here, the loss and grief, the fire that had taken everything, the slow work of rebuilding, the gradual opening of her heart to love again. It had not been easy, but every struggle had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this love. The barn stood behind them, a testament to resilience and new beginnings. But the real monument to what they had built together was not made of wood and nails. It was in the laughter of their children, the strength of their partnership, the love that grew deeper with every passing year. They had taken ashes and built a family, taken loss and created a legacy that would last for generations. That night, as Penelope lay in bed beside her husband, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned. It had been so much better. The fire had destroyed her barn, but in its place, she had gained a partner, a family, and a love that would sustain her through whatever years remained. Harrison's breathing deepened as he fell asleep, and Penelope smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow they would wake and start again, working together to maintain and grow what they had built. There would be challenges, there always were, but they would face them together, just as they had faced everything else. The barn that rose from the ashes had been just the beginning. What truly mattered was what they had built inside its walls, the life they had created together, the love that had grown from a chance meeting on a terrible night into something lasting and true. And every day for the rest of her life, Penelope would be grateful for the cowboy who had stopped to help a stranger and stayed to build a life, for the second chance that had come from disaster, for the proof that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can still find a way to bloom.